When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you're using, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to learn practices to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I'm a psychedelic integration coach, breathwork facilitator, and an enthusiast of personal growth. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest today, I'm so honored to have Jamie Clements back on the podcast. Jamie is a breathwork specialist and founder of the Breath Space. He's worked alongside top entrepreneurs, politicians, athletes, and many more to share the life-changing potential of breathwork and altered states of consciousness. After discovering firsthand just how impactful breathwork can be, Jamie strongly believes that breathwork is the most universal and powerful tool that we all have access to change our minds and live healthier, happy lives. Jamie, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey man, thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, and it's been awesome to watch the evolution of what you're doing, and great to return to a podcast. I think it's the first ever podcast that I've been on twice, so it's awesome.
Nice,
awesome to be back.
Awesome. Well, yes, it's been quite the evolution since the last time we spoke. The last time we did a podcast together, I was calling it One Question Wednesday and just trying to get 10 minutes of content, interview put together, and it's evolved in quite a lovely way. So I'm really glad to have you back for this kind of full circle moment.
Absolutely. No, it's great to be here, man.
Yeah. So you've had quite the exciting last year. It's just been wonderful watching your Instagram and like looking at all the things that you've been doing with Dirty and some of the big breathwork festivals it seems like you were a part of. Like, just let the audience know like what happened in the last year for you.
I'm very guilty of not being the best at reflecting, and I really enjoy conversations like this and questions like this as an opportunity to do a little bit of active reflection. And I think I was saying to you just before we started recording, if someone had told me at the beginning of last year everything that would happen for me personally, professionally, I probably wouldn't have believed them. But there was just a really nice, I think what ended up being a really nice momentum and evolution of the hard work that I'd put in the couple of years before. So I launched my business at the beginning of 2020. And so 2020 and 2021 really felt like the grind phase, just really kind of getting things off the ground, getting a feel for it, learning how to work for myself, and building connections, building a network, building relationships to my business as well. And that served as a bit of a trampoline, a catapult in a way for what happened last year, which was just a string of amazing experiences, hooking up with different practitioners to work on their retreats, worked with some incredible people, working on all kinds of different areas. And then for me personally, getting an opportunity to teach at Russell Brand's festival here in the UK called Community, which hopefully I'll be back at with the guys from Dirty this year in the summer. Another big wellness festival here in the UK. Both of those had sort of over 100 people taking part in those sessions, which was wild and incredible as an experience as a facilitator. And really just, kind of expanding my presence and my practice especially in the UK, but also getting opportunities to travel, to work abroad. But I feel like I have really just built my business and built my own, I guess, acknowledgement and sort of credibility, particularly in London and the UK in this space. And that's been, I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to do that, and to have had so many people want to work with me and trust me to work with them. So yeah, it was an amazing year, a really amazing year, and very, very grateful for it.
Yeah, I've been so excited just watching you and like just being, yes, this
Hmm.
looks so amazing. Um, I'm curious, just as a practitioner and facilitator myself. You mentioned doing breath work and facilitating for these larger groups. For these larger groups, does that change the way that you're facilitating in any way, versus like a more smaller, intimate setting?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think every time I hold a space, every time I facilitate, I learn something about myself and about how I work, which I love. Like, I'm always fine tuning things, consciously and sometimes unconsciously. For those bigger groups, I think if I'm ever working sort of 20 plus, but especially as you get to sort of 100 plus, I'm then at that point thinking about, okay, who is coming in to support me? Who are my co-facilitators? Who's assisting? Who do I trust and respect to hold that space with me? And I think the only thing that I've noticed as I've brought in people to assist, is that I view my role changing slightly, in that I am almost holding the overarching space and sort of creating the full experience. And the people assisting are doing more of the hands on work, more of the body work, more of the individual facilitation. And I still enjoy, in those bigger sessions, if I'm walking through the space and there's somebody that I feel drawn to working with, I will still work individually. But I view my main role there, or I feel that my main role in those larger sessions is kind of the bigger picture. And I do really enjoy that. I like seeing everything that's going on and really seeing how the group are feeding into each other. And I'm lucky enough to have an incredible network of people who I've supported in the past, who've supported me. It's a very kind of cohesive environment from that perspective. So yeah, I would say that's the main difference, is just in the smaller groups, I'll very much be working hands on with people much more individually. And the bigger groups tends to be a slightly more zoomed out version of that facilitation.
Yeah, the scalability.
For sure, and it's interesting. Just, I think the more I from the experience that I've had of those bigger groups, there's so much more. There's so many more people in the melting pot. There's so much more energy in the melting pot, and there's people's experiences feeding into everyone else's and creating such a. They're high energy in terms of those big sessions. There's a lot that can happen, which is, you know, needs to be managed carefully and safely. And I think that's always my key driver, but also not limiting people's experience by being overly cautious, just kind of having an emphasis and a focus on safety first and foremost, but then allowing it to unfold in the way that it needs to unfold.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of trust there, on your part and of your team and of the container as well. And
Mm,
like from my business experience, like working in retail and working in these other non-breath work or coaching environments, I know that that's such a key thing, to be able to trust your team, to trust what's happening, and to be able to give up that control to a certain extent. Because if you're not trusting, then you're like, I have to be in charge of every little thing, and then you're not able to do your job and what you're there to do.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a session yesterday, uh, where I had 40 people in London, and I had three people supporting, and that it worked so nicely because, oftentimes, people are asking, if they're supporting, they're sort of asking, okay, what do you want from me? Like, what are you looking for? Because everyone works slightly differently. And my answer is always kind of vague in a way, but sort of specifically vague. I'm saying, I trust you, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I know that you can do this. Use your intuition in the way that you normally would in any other session. um, I'll occasionally be like, I'll wave at someone and be like, hey, can you work with this person? Because I'm busy, but I can see that this person needs support. But that's about as far as I go into sort of the management of those people. I'm just like, I trust you, and I trust that you trust yourself. And I think that's the most important thing. And sort of just allowing people to do their thing, because they're not going to work in the same way that I work. And so just
Yes.
getting the best out of those people. It's a weird kind of parallel to actual like corporate management. It's like,
It is.
how do you get the best out of your team? And often I
Right.
think that is allowing them to be themselves and empowering them to do that. So yeah, it's not something I thought about, but yeah, the more I've worked with other people, that's definitely the approach that I've tried to take, is a pretty hands-off manager.
That's great. And those are the exact type of managers that I love to work for, and like the what I aspired to be when I was in that role as well. Like I used to tell people very similar to what you just said, like, look, the less you and I are talking, the better you're doing, because I trust you and I trust that your way is just as good as mine.
Mm.
Like if we're not getting the result that we want, then we'll chat. Then we can meet up and tweak it and fine tune it. But like, what to do. I don't need to tell you how to do your job necessarily.
For sure. And I think probably also within that, maybe, and maybe this is something I can bring in the future, is almost, I know that there are some people who do like a bit more specificity. And so it's saying, okay, this is what I want you to do within the realms of you expressing yourself how you want to express, but actually giving a little bit more guidance for the people who, because people work in different ways. And so some people
Yeah.
like guidance, some people like being left to their own devices. I'm definitely someone who likes being left to their own devices. Otherwise I wouldn't work for myself. But yeah, it's interesting. Almost, yeah, that's a helpful reframe in a way to look at it as like a more traditional working environment and say, okay, how am I bringing out the best in these people that are here? And very much, I also very keen for it to be extremely non-hierarchical. Like I don't want to be there going, hey, this is my show.
Right.
It's like, no, we're all here to do a job. And our job is all largely the same in the spaces that we're operating in. So yeah, it's an interesting one to think about.
That's super cool. I love that parallel between that more corporate business and
Mm.
what we're doing here. Um, I wanted to ask you about something that you mentioned in sort of the intro material that I sent over, which was this idea of full spectrum breath work. And I was wondering if you could maybe go into what that means a little bit, because I have a feeling that it's really aligned to something that I've been getting more into over the last year. And I've been really excited to kind of dive deeper into this topic with you.
Yeah. So the inspiration for this came from a friend of mine who is a practitioner in his own right of a different kind, and he started speaking a few years ago about a notion of full spectrum health, which is looking at mind, body, movement, nutrition, like this holistic approach, right? And I started thinking, I was like, the way in which I talk about breathwork, sort of at first when I started speaking about it, it felt quite scattered because there were so many different areas that fall under the banner of breathwork that I was interested in, that I was training in, that I was teaching, that I was working with personally. But none of them they all overlap in their own sort of unique ways, but some of them are vastly different. And so, like the work that I will do with an athlete on CO2 tolerance will be a very different session to a one-on-one where I'm using conscious connected breath work. Like obviously the unifier there is breath, but they are different worlds and different kind of ends of a spectrum. And so I started thinking more and more about this. And I used to always come back to Ilamanga's acronym, the art of breathwork. So ART, awareness, regulation, transformation. And again, I think it's probably what I've now come to is my own evolution of that, which is this idea of full spectrum breathwork. And what I mean specifically by that is, as I've alluded to, breathwork as this umbrella term has gone on this huge rise in notoriety over the last few years. But with that, it's come to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And we've seen almost like this in certain parts of the breathwork world, a bit of a splitting, going, okay, well, I'm a master instructor. I'm not personally, but someone saying I'm a master instructor in the oxygen advantage. And I think conscious connected breathwork is a load of rubbish and not worth doing. And some people would even say dangerous. And so it's almost like, okay, you are both calling yourselves, let's say, people in those worlds, breathwork instructors, breathwork coaches, but you do not agree and you teach completely different things. And so I'm thinking here mainly from a client perspective, a customer perspective, how confusing that must be. If it's confusing for us in this space, how confusing is that for someone who is booking themselves or wanting to book themselves into a breathwork session? Because they might end up not knowing what they're turning up for. And so for me, full spectrum breathwork is this more holistic approach, saying we have functional breathing, how you breathe day to day, moment to moment. What is your natural state of breath, your baseline breath? What is the health of your respiration ultimately as a foundational pillar? And how can we address that through things like the oxygen advantage and functional breathing practices? And to me, that is breathwork. You then have breathing exercises and techniques that are box breathing, extended exhale breathing, really all geared towards nervous system state shifting, nervous system regulation, subtle changes that you can, do in a matter of minutes to create a shift. And then you have the deeper end of the spectrum, which is therapeutic modalities of breathwork, transformational styles of breathwork, conscious connected breathwork. And so these are all interlinked and intertwined by breath, but they can all be quite distinct and they can all cross over. And the reason that I like to take that approach is that I believe that there is room to benefit for every person from every area of that spectrum. And that, for me, allows me to be the best possible practitioner for any given client, because they can come to me and say, this is what I'm seeing challenges with, this is where I'm struggling. And I go, okay, we'll take a sprinkle of this, a sprinkle of that, and a sprinkle of that, and give you something that is tailored and bespoke and not limited to one specific area of breathing and breath work. So I think that's the approach. And that's, I guess, the context as to why I've started taking that approach as well.
Yeah, you're so spot on with that in terms of like people, the confusion for a client and what breathwork means, and that it's become such this large catch-all term. I'm doing I just recently started this working at this yoga studio, and they said, do you want to do a weekly class of meditation and breathwork? So like literally on the class roster on the website, it just says meditation and breathwork. And I have an hour a week, and I'm like, that is such a big empty canvas in which I can go in so many different directions, and it's really not giving the clients showing up to that any sort of indication. I mean, I could do vastly different things underneath that umbrella and still say, well, this is meditation and breath work, And so it has been that challenge of like, okay, well, where do I want to go as a teacher and facilitator, but also how can I meet the people that are coming to the class where they're at as well, and not be like, hey, we're going to do, like you said, connected breath work today, or something that is just jarring or that they're not really ready for. And that journey is almost like mirrored my own journey with breathwork, where the transformational type of breathwork was what I first came in with and was like, okay, this is breathwork. And then I stepped into the arena and was like, oh wow, there is all this other stuff here that I should learn, because it's not just this one particular practice. And I also feel like it's the other part that's really important to taking that full spectrum approach is that all the different facets, all the different types of breath work build upon one another and are interconnected. Like they can all help each other. If you have more awareness, then that's just going to help you when you start to get into those, state shifting breath works. And certainly if you, go too far off the deep end and the transformational or types of breath work, then having something to shift your state back down is super important as well. So
Yeah.
it's just like it's only beneficial, I think, to take that approach.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, to come back to something that you mentioned there, it's instead of trying to fit every client into what you do, you can fit what you do to every client. And I think that is, people have asked me the question in the past, what's your niche? Are you going to like specialize? Are you going to niche down? And there's a lot of stuff when you're in any kind of coaching around like how are you going to niche down and like really identify your specific market. And I'm like, the niche is breath work.
Right.
That is a to me at least, that is a niche enough, because it's still for a lot of people something new, something fringe, something unknown. And so actually the niche is how can we bring that to the people who typically wouldn't engage in these kinds of practices. And it's almost like a weird inverse niche where it's like my niche feels like it's accessibility and reach, to be able to say, okay, how do we make this more accessible for people, more clear for people? How do we demystify it? How do we actually open it up for people in a way that is easier to digest, rather than saying, okay, you have to have experience of meditation, or you have to have experience of all of these different things to engage. There's no prerequisite with breath, I think, as long as it's being practiced in a safe way.
Yeah. Well, we're all breathing all the time, right?
Exactly.
So that's
Yeah.
the thing, and I think that's the other sort of funny side to that of being a breath worker, is like the people kind of coming in scratching their heads going, well, I've been doing this my whole life, why would I need to pay you to help me do it? And it's like, well, actually it's a deep rabbit hole depending on how far you want to take it.
Yeah. It's so incredibly simple and so incredibly nuanced and intricate and deep, depending on the level of depth that you want to go to. And I find that for me is something that is infinitely fascinating, because we know that any good science is continuously outdated and updated. And so actually we're just going to learn more, and we're going to learn more, and then we might learn that actually that's not what we thought it was, and then we're going to keep learning more and more and more. And I think that, to me, like, I don't see there being a kind of a bottom to the rabbit hole. Like it can just keep on going, and that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think part of that is like almost like the transpersonal aspect of it, or like the places where the breath sort of transcends our normal day-to-day consciousness. Like that's something that like struck me as I've been facilitating over the last year, is like sort of reflecting on these ancient wisdom traditions. At least if you want to talk about Greek, Sanskrit, Chinese, and Hebrew, the word for breath and the word for spirit is the same in all of them.
Yeah.
There's something there, like there's something where it's like, wait, hold on a second, we're talking about more than just the way that we breathe on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. Like we're able to tap into something that's a lot bigger and a lot deeper, and sort of, that's when to me, like the rabbit hole just expands and starts to go like, okay, how deep do you really want to go with it? But like, and that starts sometimes with just like you're saying, like, how are we breathing on a regular daily basis?
Absolutely.
And I really, for me, like I really credit our mutual colleague and friend Connie Basalski for like helping me to sort of see into that world, because like I said, I was okay, like neurodynamic breathwork and transformational breathwork, and all of a sudden found myself needing those state shifting breathworks, and like really kind of leaned on her a bit to help me out with that. And it really transformed my own life and my own nervous system. And that in turn informed like, okay, this is how I want to be teaching, and this is where I want to take people. And it becomes, like you saying, full spectrum and multidimensional instead of just this one sort of type of experience.
Exactly. And have so much respect for Connie. I think every time she's not a, she's not a social media machine in terms of her output, in terms of like regularity, which I respect in its own way. But when she puts something out, it always hits the mark.
Right.
Every single time, it is one of those posts that just goes, wow, I understand that, and I it's like I knew that, but I've never heard it communicated so well and so
Mm.
clearly and so precisely and so in such an engaging way. And it's just, the few times where I have had kind of longer conversations with Connie, it's just been an incredible learning experience. Like she's a great mind. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I totally agree. And I have to say, like, I feel the same about some of the content that you put out, like it's so precise and kind of cuts right into the point. Like the reason, one of the reasons that this show is called The Vital Point is like, not only is like, okay, we've got to practice, that's the important thing, but also this concept from Buddhism of like that you can express this vastly profound idea in this very succinct like thing that just cuts right to the point, right to the core of what you're doing. Or you can pontificate about it and write like these huge, long manuals and things like that. So like you had a post that I just loved where it was like, here's what you should do if you have a minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and if you want to relax or energize or shift your state. And like, here's these different practices. And it was so great because again, full spectrum, like just really demonstrating that how much you can do with the breath and like the different directions that you can take it. And the fact that it's not just this one size fits all type experience for people.
Yeah, thank you, man. No, I really appreciate that. I think it's a battle that I have a lot with social media, which is the pitfalls and the negatives and the challenges with social media often come from this oversimplification and polarization, where it's like pick a side and then be very definitive in your belief and your
Right.
communication of that belief. Because whether it's Twitter, you only have a set amount of characters, whether it's an Instagram reel, you've only got 90 seconds. You can't go into the depths of a point on social media and still be engaging. So it's riding this balance between what is engaging but accurate, and also acknowledging of nuance. And that is like, I tear my hair out going, oh, I've written this post and it sounds really like zingy and clear and clean, and it might land well with people, but it doesn't take into account that point or that point. And it's like, it then opens up and it's sort of, I'm glad you have the ability to write the caption to sort of be like, I believe what I put in the post, but also let's think about this, this, and this. Because I think it's too easy to oversimplify on social media. And I think it's important to always account for the nuance and account for the safety elements and the kind of things that maybe aren't as sexy. Because we spend our time kind of pushing the stuff that's sexy and appealing
Right.
and engaging, but actually some of the really important bits like safety and just like basic practices aren't as out there as some of the stuff that people really need.
It's safety isn't as clickbaity as like fat DMT release from this breathwork, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I struggle with. Like, people promoting like these huge cathartic experiences in videos. I'm like, that can be such a powerful part of the experience. And I understand that it's clickbaity and engaging, but it
Right.
doesn't do the world of what we do justice in
Mm.
terms of the really important factors beyond that, which are the safety and the healing and the subtleties that go into that. And that's something that I have a pretty daily battle with in terms of breath work as a space in general.
Sure. Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more because safety is such a critical piece of this. I mean, at least just from one dimension, when we're talking about those deeper dives. Um, it's my belief that we're only going to, or that inner intelligence or that higher self, whatever you want to call it, is only going to open to the level that we feel safe. So for me, that's one reason that safety is so important as a facilitator. But I'd love to hear more about, how we create safety, how you specifically create safety, and like what that means to you.
Absolutely. This is probably, one of my favorite topics to not necessarily speak to people about, but
Yeah,
speak about, like have conversations. I was on a Zoom call before Christmas with some incredible, like long-standing practitioners like Steph Magenta and people of that caliber. And there was about 8 of us having this conversation, kind of, as practitioners, what can we do to help the space
mm,
foster more safety? And I think for me, the safety piece is probably the key to ensuring the longevity, the credibility of these practices. It only takes, a few bad experiences for people for it to kind of fall into disrepute, especially when it's relatively unregulated
sure.
as a space. And so I think that's something that's worth noting is actually in an unregulated space, the responsibility for safety and ethics really falls at the feet of the training company, but also the practitioner yourself. Like I have my own ethical standards that I abide by, and that I've pulled from, practitioner alliances and other areas. But it's really, it's up to you at the end of the day to kind of embody those. In terms of how I feel it, how I feel we can create that safety and why I think it's important, I think what you said is spot on. Um, People will only go as deep as they feel safe. So the safety um, mirrors the depth, or the depth of the experience mirrors the level of safety. Um, I think safety comes in different forms for different people. I think for some people, as a client, as a customer, for some customers, that safety will come from feeling like they resonate and connect to a practitioner, like the practitioner is a subtle mirror to them. That's safety because there's connection, co-regulation, resonance there. Some people get safety and reassurance from someone's knowledge. So if you think that someone is an expert and they know what they're talking about, that puts you at ease. That gives you safety. For some people, it's an unspoken dialogue between their nervous system and the practitioner's nervous system going, oh, yeah, okay, I feel at ease here. I feel at ease in this person's presence. That I think is powerful. For me, I believe that I can show up and provide safety if I myself feel at home in my own skin, if I feel like if I'm in a healthy, regulated place, like I've been doing my own work, like that's how at a bare minimum, I feel like I deserve, or they deserve me to show up in that way. Um, and then actually the way in which I like to introduce the work, how I like to structure the sessions, how I, and to speak to, some of the work that you do around integration, the preparation and the aftercare and the integration actually is a huge part of the safe experience. So that preparation being some communication in the days leading up to the session, clarity on what to expect. I really do think when it comes to altered states of consciousness and potentially shadow work and challenging experiences, slightly darker experiences with altered states, setting expectations is incredibly powerful from a safety perspective. To say it won't definitely be heavy and dark and emotional, but it certainly could be. So when that shows up, if it does show up, they're not going, oh my God, what the actual fuck is happening right now? And they
Right.
start going into like a big trauma response. They actually go, oh no, it might still be really hard, but they go, nope, okay, I have been told that this could show up and I feel safe in experiencing this as a result. And I think that is really powerful in setting expectations of how the experience could play out. And that's, again, a fine line that I like to tread in my sessions, which is, how do you explain what could show up without people then having expectations of what the experience will be like? So I say, okay, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. However, what I really need you to do is suspend your expectations and just allow yourself to open to whatever unfolds.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky one. It is a tricky one, because people will then get to the end and they go, oh, like mine was really calm, and they're almost disappointed because someone else had a really big emotional release, or someone else had a bit of a, psychedelic visual trip with the breath. And so it's the nature of the human mind, like that kind of default mode, prefrontal element of the brain is about creating narrative and stories and attachment and expectation and all of these things. So it is a tricky one, but I think as far as safety goes, it really lies in how you embody safety as a practitioner, and what does that look like for you, and that will look like different for every practitioner. But then also, I think the preparation and the integration piece as to how you like end to end and bookend an experience of an altered state of consciousness is incredibly important. And yeah, I think those are the key points for me in terms of what I do.
I love everything about what you just said. I mean, there's so many different things to touch on there. The co-regulation piece is huge, and something that I don't think that people talk enough about unless they're kind of deep into this type of work. I don't think that the average person walking in off the street going, I'm going to try this breath work thing, is necessarily really aware of that, but yet their nervous system feels it. They might not get it up here in the mind, but there's something in the body that says, oh wait, okay, this is safe, this feels okay. And it's, yeah, you're so right. Like, we have to be doing our own work as practitioners. I just started watching last night. There's this new show with Jason Segel called Shrinking, where he's like he's a therapist, but he, like, at the beginning of the show, like, he's coming out of this year of, like, his wife died. There's this big personal tragedy, and so he's basically like a train wreck trying to be a therapist to other people. And it's so funny because it's the exact opposite end of the spectrum of what we were just talking about, where it's like, his peers are kind of going like, dude, you got to get your shit together, because how are you supposed to be helping these people if you're not?
And you know what? It's an interesting topic as well, because I fell into a bit of a trap early on in my career, this part of my career, because I thought that meant that I couldn't have struggles. And so I think it's saying life won't be perfect, and you will have your bad days, and you will have challenges and adverse experiences, and you won't always be perfect in your own way, but you will need to show up, or at least take, let's say you have a tragedy, a trauma occur, take that responsibility to cancel your sessions, to say, I'm really sorry, for these next 3 weeks, I need to focus on me so that I can show up for you in the best possible way, and the way that I expect of myself. And so it's not expecting to show up in the same way every single time, but also being honest enough with yourself to say, today's not a day for this. Like, I don't feel like I can show up in the way that I would like to. Obviously, taking into account like the reality of, rescheduling and things like that, but being really honest. And then as a result, having tools at your disposal to say, okay, I don't feel 100% right now, but I've got an hour until my session. I'm going to do some breath work. I'm going to, journal. I'm going to take the steps and use those tools to get myself to a place where I feel safe in my own skin, so that I can help other people feel safe. So I think that's really key. And I think as well, from a co-regulation perspective, group experiences, yes, there's the interaction between the nervous system of the participants and the practitioner, but also the participants and the other participants.
Mm.
And that's harder to mitigate for, right? There might be someone who's giving you a bad vibe, whatever, like your nervous system is picking up on it in subtle ways. And so for me, I always, where possible, try and get some level of group share and kind of engaged shared vulnerability going on at the beginning, just so that, because shared vulnerability is one of the most kind of bonding things you can have at whatever depth. And so even if it's just in a room full of new people, introducing yourself and saying a word as to how you're feeling in the space, like, hey, I'm Jamie, I'm feeling nervous. And then someone else goes, oh God, oh, yeah, I'm feeling nervous too. Like, I'm so glad someone else said that. And it's like, it's connection. It's just like, and that puts people at ease in the space where it is strangers ultimately. And to have a powerful experience where you need to feel safe surrounded by strangers is quite difficult to manufacture and sort of engineer and create. So I think there's layers. Like it's really interesting to kind of discuss it a bit more deeply, because I
Yeah.
think it's things that sometimes you do without thinking, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm curious just to sort of pick your brain on this as well, just to kind of pull that thread a little bit more. So how do you as a facilitator in those larger groups that you're talking about kind of create that space where it's, you know, it's all good in like maybe like a yoga studio or a workshop, but like if you've got 100 people, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to have everybody be
Yeah.
introducing themselves and saying how they feel.
Yeah. So the bigger the session, the harder it gets, I
Yeah.
think. I would say with big groups, it's kind of a case of trying to get some back and forth between yourself and the group. So, like,
Mm.
how's everybody feeling? And you sort of get the odd word thrown back at you, and sort of like just a little bit of, okay, let's soften, like, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Um, I've done in the past as well for sort of groups of 40 and 50, just like we're in a big circle and it will just be right, we're going to go round and I just want everyone to say one word as to how they're feeling.
Yeah.
So we kind of just get a little bit, just I'll take anything at that point, just so it doesn't feel like it's just me talking and people aren't really sure and not feeling super comfortable. And it's really interesting that the thing that helps people to ultimately feel more comfortable is something that's a little bit uncomfortable, like
Yeah.
introducing themselves in a group of strangers. Like, that's not super comfortable for the majority of people, but it does help us feel more connected,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah, because like we're all going through that same nervousness, you know, to some degree. Like I think that's the illusion that we have that our ego creates, right? Is like, well, I'm the only one that feels this way. I'm the only one that feels scared or nervous or vulnerable, and everybody else has it together. And then when we start to share and open up, it's like, oh no, actually, we're all in the same place to one degree or the next, you know. And to kind of tie it back to what something that you said earlier about like the that uh, mistaken thought that you had to be perfect to be showing up and be in the facilitator role. You know, it's like, no, like it's not becoming perfect, it's just becoming more resilient and more open. And that goes back to that full spectrum, you know,
Mm,
because there are breathwork practices that we can use to make the nervous system more resilient, to allow us to mobilize more into that more activated fight or flight state without totally going off, you know, into a space where we're overloaded, and then being able to come back into that regulation. So
yeah,
it's more about like, hey, how can I make myself more resilient? How can I make myself, um, you know, like that tree swaying in the breeze. You know, we're not getting knocked over by it. We're just kind of swaying and being able to move.
exactly. It's just it's the self-awareness as well, to know
Mm,
when you're not fully
ah,
like in the best possible state. It's like having the
yes.
awareness, then having the tools, and then also alongside of all of that, building the resilience. And so I think it's just like that continued journey to work on yourself is what people respond to, because actually I don't I personally don't trust the facilitator who is playing the guru. That doesn't work for me. It works for some people, but my belief again within these healing realms of breathwork is, if someone says, "Oh, you were amazing," I go, "Thank you. Like, I'm grateful for you for saying that, but everything that you just experienced was because of you."
Yeah.
I can create, my role here is to create the space and make you feel as safe as you possibly can in this space.
Yeah.
Everything that happens then between you arriving and leaving that space is your breath, your psyche, your experience. And so it's empowering self-healing rather than doing the healing for people. And so
Right.
I don't enjoy kind of the terminology of like, I am the healer. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Fully agree. And gosh, this podcast for me has been such a great venue, or like theater to explore that in myself, because there are times where I feel myself start to get so self-conscious or so like nervous, like I want to impress the person that I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
to, or it's somebody that I like really admire and I look up to them, or just I feel intimidated by like their stature. And like I've had several opportunities in the last year to like open up and share that, which is totally different than what I would have done in the past, which is just like, let me just shove this down. Let me like man up and like get past it and not be vulnerable. And then I'm sitting there in this like dysregulated state trying to have a conversation with somebody, right?
Yeah.
And instead, like each time I've taken this opportunity to just say, you know what, like I'm gonna pause for a second and voice like I feel nervous, or like I feel a little intimidated talking to you. And it's a little bit more than excitement, like
Mm.
I'm feeling a little bit nervous. I feel anxious. And whenever that's happened, and not only have I been validated by the other person, but like immediately the pressure just starts to decrease,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so to me, like there's that awareness that I have, especially of the somatic awareness of what's happening, right? That I didn't have before.
Yeah.
But there's also, to kind of go back to that resilience piece of like, okay, I can breathe into this until I have a chance to do something else with it, like share it, be vulnerable, let that pressure off in that other way, you
Yeah.
know. And
Absolutely.
I know you do the ice baths, and it's like kind of similar, right? Like you're never going to conquer that ice bath. You're
Yeah.
never going to be like, I've fucking got this. Like this is nothing. There's
Yeah.
always that like, that friction, and that like that fear, or that, an anxiety about it. But we don't have to be ruled by that. There's different ways we
Yeah.
can deal with it.
I love this point, man, because I think I was thinking on this the other day around the topic of cold water and ice baths, which is no one wants to get in.
Right.
Anyone who tells you they do has a great mindset to help themselves get over the fact that they don't want to get in the ice.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no point, I don't think. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I genuinely believe I want to get in an ice bath, but when it comes to getting in, I don't want to get in, is the
Right.
best way to explain it, right? And I think it's the same it's this misnomer, this misunderstanding of when you see someone doing something that you think you could never do because you're too scared. You think that they're not scared, but in actual fact, they have just chosen or found a way to overcome the fear. And
Yeah.
so like I until the age of 25 would have said the idea of standing up in front of 10 people and speaking was my worst nightmare, let alone 50, 100, 200. That doesn't mean I don't get nervous before I go and do that. And this brings me on to kind of one of my favorite points around healing at the moment. I have a rational brain, and I very much view like these healing steps, this personal growth comes from building the bank of evidence that you can do the thing that you're afraid of. So the more times you get into an ice bath, the fear's still there, but you have done it so many times before that your mind is going, oh, I know I can do this, even though I don't want to do this. It's me running a session, same thing. I'm going there going, oh God, like I'm a bit nervous today because there's going to be a lot of people there. And I go, oh, let's refer back to the evidence, Your Honor. And I'm like, okay, I feel like I can do this. And so it's building this stack of evidence to overcome that fear, to overcome the imposter syndrome, whatever it might be. Like it's still there. The fear is still there. You've just found a way, whatever that way is, to beat it on that occasion. And I think that's incredibly powerful. It's just a way to view all of these kind of elements of growth.
Yeah, for sure. And I not just the mind, not just like letting the mind know, but like the body as well, like what it kind of reminds me of what you just said is like the sort of like that analogy of like seeing a rope, like, and thinking it's a snake. Like if you think it's a snake, you're going to react in a certain way. Your nervous system's going to react in a certain way. Your mind is going to react in a certain way. If you know it's a rope, well, it's not so dangerous, so yeah, just accumulating the evidence through practice that that, hey, this is not really dangerous. And it is, the longer that you stay in, when we're talking about ice ice water, right? Like you can't just live in the ice, but for this few minutes, this really is not dangerous. And there's an invitation there to bring that practice and bring that safety. And to me, the key is that surrender, because the longer you fight it, the longer you're like, no, I don't want to be in here. This sucks. Why am I doing this? Like the harder it's going to be, as opposed to like, wow, what a wonderful opportunity to build my resilience, to build my nervous system, to accumulate that evidence, and then continue to build my case.
Absolutely.
I had
Totally
this
agree.
wonderful opportunity last year to help facilitate this retreat. And one of the things that I did was take all the participants through an ice bath. And these were all plant medicine practitioners. It was a dry retreat, but it was kind of like a test run for, a retreat where there would be medicine being used. And I said, what I want to do with this practice is take this as an opportunity to bring presence, to bring awareness, and not to dissociate from this experience. Because if you work with plant medicine or expanded states of consciousness like breathwork or whatever, eventually there's going to be something that comes up that's uncomfortable, that you're going to want to get away from. And just like you're saying, like it's an opportunity to be there, to be present, to stay with it. And so that's my invitation for you getting into the ice, is treat it like that. Treat it as practice for when something challenging comes up in your medicine work. And there was one guy that was like a jujitsu, MMA, like, ex-military guy. And he had actually provided like the tub we were using. Right. And so I was talking to him. I said, so like, what's your practice like? And he said, I usually do like 10 minutes. And I was like, 10 minutes? That's a lot, And so he went last. And so I walked all these people through, like, okay, we're going to ground ourselves. We're going to like bring our awareness to the breath. And then we're going to stay with that as we're in the ice, right? My invitation is stay with it, and watch them all go through this very mindful, like present experience. And then he got in and he said, well, tell me at 7 minutes where I'm at. And I watched him like holding on to the sides of the tub and I watched him kind of like dissociate out of the experience. And I just hung with him. You know, I was just
Mm.
like, hey, like, I'm right here. I'm going to stay with you. And he ended up getting out at like 6 minutes. But
Mm-hmm.
his comment was, there was so much better than what I usually do, which is down at the jujitsu gym. And there's a bunch of other guys being like, come on, you can do another 5 minutes. Like, just do
Yeah.
it, you know? And like, and I was so grateful for that opportunity to like see that idea in motion, you know, of like, hey, there is a different way.
Yeah.
And we don't have to make it into this thing where, just like you're saying, like, I love the ice. I don't, you know, like, I'm not going to pretend like I do. I'm not going to posture like I do.
Mm.
Every single time it's like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But I'm going to do it anyway.
You know what, man? It's such an important part of the discussion because it's something that I hate's a strong word. It's something I dislike a lot about cold water Instagram. It's become a competition. People
Right.
are posting celebrating their personal best,
Yeah.
and I'm going. Not only is that, I guess, not from my own opinion and experience, not the right approach to get the adaptations, the benefits that you're looking for, but it's also dangerous because it's encouraging other people to compete, to do the same, to it's
Yeah.
disregarding any sense of us all having different nervous systems and us all starting from different points, and it's encouraging people to go beyond what's necessary. You know, I am a big believer. I kind of operate usually around the sub 5 minute mark more often than not, especially working, you know, if I'm working at sub 5 degrees Celsius temperatures, then definitely kind of 2 minutes, 3 minutes, absolute tops.
Yeah.
And this is why I always come back to this idea of like, I ask people, okay, so what's the most dangerous thing about cold water work? And they'll go hypothermia or adrenal fatigue or whatever. I'm like, yeah, but what are those all symptoms of? Ego.
Mm.
And that's the most dangerous thing with cold water immersion is ego. And it's especially, you know, so the social element of cold water is amazing. It's an incredible way. It's like social wellness. It's an incredible way to bond with people through that shared challenge and that kind of fighting it together, going
Yeah.
into combat. But it also adds to the ego element and the sort
Yeah.
of, oh, well, they're staying in, so I should probably stay in, rather than going, no, I know my body, I know my limits. I'm done. Um, and it's a funny one because even with that knowledge, there's a fine line, I think, again, between what is that first resistance point where your body's like, oh, let's get out of here. And when you go past that, that's where you start to get, you know, the good stuff. And where is actually you're pushing yourself too far. And only you can know that in your own body and through experience. So, yeah, for anyone listening who's like new to cold water work, I'm by no means an expert, but start small and build up is like all I can say, and kind of trust your breath as a good guide as to how in control you are of the experience.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it kind of ties back to something you said earlier about, you know, the framing of like, this is an opportunity to grow or to challenge yourself to get something out of the experience. And if you go into it knowing that, you know, knowing like, hey, it's more healthy for me to go with the lowest effective dose than to try to be, you know, like the record holder, or to let my ego be the one in charge. You
Mm.
know, it's like, I mean, there's so many things that we could apply that to in terms of expanded realms of consciousness, whether that's breath work, plant medicine, cold water, you know, anything. Like, when the ego is in charge, that's when there's the potential to learn. The universe might teach you a lesson,
Yeah,
you
you'll
know,
get
because
your ass kicked.
the universe is much bigger and much stronger than your ego, no
Yeah,
matter how big you think it is, you
absolutely.
know.
It's the easiest and most certain way to get your ass kicked by whatever thing you're working with. I think I really enjoyed your kind of your comparison and the way you framed that around cold water um, and medicine work, and sort of leaning into the resistance, kind of
Yeah.
like getting comfortable with the resistance, getting comfortable in that space, because that's often, that's where the gold lies, is in confronting the challenging aspects.
Yeah.
And that applies beyond everything that we're talking about here. Like, it's just a really good way to approach life, is, you know,
Right.
the gold lies beyond the pain, but you've got to go into it first. You've got to uncover it and dig into it.
Yeah. How many places is that, applicable in your life? Whether it's like chatting up a girl, that you see like in a pub, or, having to give a presentation at work, or, just the list goes on, right? Like
Yeah.
and that's really like where I got interested in cold water exposure in the first place. Was I was going through a divorce, and I had to do a bunch of shit I did not want to do,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, if I start practicing doing something that I don't want to do voluntarily, will this make the things that I don't have a choice about easier? And
Yeah.
the answer is absolutely yes. And then once I started to practice, because of my, awareness practices, because of my meditation practices, I started to notice that, like, I mean, I could plan for an ice bath like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden start hearing the tape running of like why I don't need to do this today. Like, it wasn't at a volume 10, but like
Mm.
a volume 1 in the background, there's like this little program already running, being like, do you feel like maybe you have a cold today, or like, I'm really busy, I don't need to do that. And if that thought wasn't addressed, or at least aware, it would just continue to build and build and build and build. And there was something about just being aware of it, rather than trying to ignore it or trying to overcome it, just being like, I see you, I get you, we're safe, this isn't going to kill us, and I'm
Hmm.
going to do it anyway because I know it's good for me, and I'm going to feel really good after I get out, you know.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is why I'm pretty confident in what I said earlier around kind of no one fully wanting to get in the ice, because I think that the only way that you, I think, would be able to get to that place would be total ego dissolution, because it's the ego part of the mind that is telling you, I don't want to do this. And it's the same part of the mind that fires up when you get in and you're in there going, why am I in here? I want to get out. It's been 20 seconds and I need to get out. And I always say, I was with some friends in Mexico and we were doing some work with cold out there, and I landed on this thing. It's like, when you're in there, when you get in, your job is to say no to the first no. So the first time the voice says get out, say no. If that voice keeps coming back after a minute, see how you feel in the body, see what's going on, and maybe that is your time to get out. Like, if you can't get that no in check, like if you can't get
Yeah.
the stress response, whatever it is, if you can't get the breath in check, then probably your time has come to get out of the ice. But most of us will get that first no, where it's like,
Hmm.
hey, asshole, get out. And you're like, no, no, I'm doing this for good reason. I know that you want me to get out, but I'm here and I want to be here and I can do this. And that's where the practices, the awareness practices, the work wins. And
Yeah.
that's where it pays off, because you are able to view that ego voice as a separate voice. And there's another voice that says, hey, no, I've got this. Thanks for your input. And I love that. Like, thanks so much. I appreciate you, but
Yeah.
I'll chat to you in 3 minutes. So we'll speak again in 3 minutes, and we'll be cool.
Yeah.
But it's a practice, and it comes with that experience again.
I think another thing that's helped me with it a lot is like, well, I'll relate it to psychedelics first, and then kind of
Mm,
relate it back to the ice bath. Um, I feel like oftentimes, people that are approaching plant medicines or psychedelics for healing, and myself included, I'll definitely include myself in this. Um, we have like these big expectations for the transformation that we're going to get out of that experience. And yet I think it behooves us to ask the question, like, if I'm trying to change 40 years of patterning and behavior, is it realistic that one dose, one ceremony is going to completely repattern that, right? And then adjusting that expectation of like, hey, the integration, the change is a process. It's not necessarily this magic pill that's just going to, immediately change everything about my experience. Well, with the to take that context into ice baths, um I forget where I heard it, but there was something once that I read that really struck a chord with me in terms of the thing that is happening in your body when you're approaching the ice bath is written in the reptilian limbic brain. It's written into our DNA for millennia. Like that code of ice water equals danger is been in there. Like it's written so deep into the brain and the limbic system and the DNA that like the fact that you think that you're going to be able to conquer that within 1 or 100 or even 1,000 ice baths is just unrealistic.
Mm,
But you can work with it. You can start to adapt it and integrate that. Okay, like this is healthy within reason, as long as I'm paying attention to my body and my nervous system and not letting the ego run out of control. So yeah, it's just but I respect that. Like,
mm,
wow, here's this really deep seated code within me whose job it is to keep me safe.
yeah.
And what a beautiful system that there's these codes and patterns and programs within me that are running without me having to pay attention to them at all. That's super cool to me. And the fact
Mm,
that I can do something to get in there and tinker with that code just a little bit and change it and shape it to some small degree, to me is kind of magical,
ab-
and a beautiful thing.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think how, inspiring as well that we have now developed to a point where we can actively use something that our reptilian brain knows is danger to better ourselves. Like that to
Yeah,
me, I'm like, hey, we're hacking the system here. Like
right.
we're going into the wiring, into the mainframe and learning about it. We're not just taking it at face value. And I think that I find really interesting. And I think it sparks something in my mind as well, because I think there's some very well respected breathwork practitioners of the scientific end of the spectrum, the functional end of the spectrum, the CO2 tolerance, hypoxic training end of the spectrum, who take a less than positive view on the healing styles of breath work, because it's a
Mhm.
mouth breath and because we're dropping CO2 levels and it's not a particularly kind of traditionally functional breath. And my riposte to that is always, yeah, I get that, but we're using it for a specific purpose that transcends science, that transcends what we currently know. I'm not using conscious connected breathing to help someone breathe in a more functional way
Right.
necessarily. Um, that being said, it still serves a purpose. And it's kind of like the ice. It's like we know that the ice is dangerous. We know that mouth breathing isn't optimal. But I'm not asking someone to mouth breathe all day. I'm not asking someone to sit in the ice for an hour. We can use dosed versions of things that our bodies might not naturally do in an optimal way to create adaptations and create changes that can be really powerful. And yeah, it's just something that came to me. I think um, it's an interesting one to think about for sure. And I think the ice is a great metaphor for so many areas of life. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, likewise. And yeah, it's such a beautiful practice. And um, I agree with you in terms of some of the this more science based breathwork guys. It's you know sometimes I have to pause and think like, okay, how much of this, to go back to our earlier point, is your marketing and your having to plant your flag and say, this is what I want to do. I mean, I felt like that recently, like, there was something from a very well respected, sort of researcher, that sort of the headline was, breath work is healthier than meditation. And I'm like, well, okay, like from from the exact perspective and frame that you're putting it in, that you have this scientific data, sure, like you have a
Hmm.
point. But is that the whole point? Is
Yeah.
that everything? I don't think so personally, and like, um, yeah, I think there's room for a lot of differing opinions and differing paths, like I
Hmm.
often, especially from like a meditation perspective, relate things back to Buddhism. Like the Buddha gave 84,000 different teachings because that's how many different types of people and different paths that that we need sometimes, like not necessarily one person needs 84,000, but like what works for me isn't necessarily what's going to be what works for you.
Mm.
And it's about finding that path that does work for you, and being able to follow it. And sometimes that might change as you continue to practice and as you continue to grow and change and explore yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I know the post that you're referring to as well on that front. And I reshared it because I was excited. I was like, hey, this is great evidence in favor of breath work. And then
Yeah.
as I posted it, I then quickly did another story being like, that being said,
Right.
meditation is incredibly powerful, perhaps not to the same extent as breath work in these areas that this study is looking at, but in so many other ways. And there are a lot of ways that I believe meditation is more powerful than breath work. It depends what your
Right.
goal is. And I think
Yeah.
that, again, to come back to the conversation we had a bit earlier about social media, is the challenge, is because effective marketing is not necessarily always the most honest view on things, or certainly not. No, I think it's honest, but it's not full. It's not giving the full picture, and in some cases, we're choosing not to give the full picture,
Right.
because it's easier to say, "Hey, here's a study that says breathwork is better than meditation, so that's why you should buy breathwork rather than meditation." Cool, okay, great, and
Yeah.
that's all you hear. And people are very happy to go, "Oh yeah, breathwork, great, fantastic, brilliant." But there is more to the discussion. Always, there are always layers.
Right. Right. Like we were saying earlier, like the social media lacks some of the context and the nuance. And it's great to, be in sort of a more long term or longer form communication, where we can have bigger discussions and discuss some of that context and that nuance. And then yeah, the niching down and saying like, this is where I'm planting my flag, that breathwork is better than meditation, and this is why you should buy my product, or hire me. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think one of the areas that I've grown in that respect is to say, if this is triggering to me, what is that? That's an invitation for me to look inside and be like, what's going on there that I'm getting so aggravated, annoyed, activated by this statement, instead of just being like, cool, that's where they're at, and I'm going to keep doing my thing.
Exactly. And we can never know someone's full, we can't know the full context behind their intentions and their journey. And yeah, it's such when you can bring that level of curiosity to your experience of life, it becomes enjoyable. It becomes playful to be like, hey, I'm really triggered. Why? Like, what is it
Right.
about? Like, I'm not better than this person because I think what they're doing isn't good.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to why I'm so triggered by it, and like why I have a problem with it, and should I have a problem with it. And then it's that fine line around like, is this actually wrong, or is it wrong for me and wrong in my eyes and wrong based on my lived experience? Because there are some things I think that are kind of like morally, but again, morally becomes subjective and personal as well, in terms of what someone believes to be moral.
Yeah.
um so yeah, it's just it keeps expanding as to sort of, what is projection, what is personal, what is subjective, what is objective. But yeah, I think if you can bring a level of curiosity to it without getting overwhelmed by the intricacies, then you can start to enjoy things more, for sure.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to that ego for me, of like, if I start to get triggered in that way, especially as somebody that, teaches breath work or teaches meditation or has 20 years of meditation experience, then like that just my ego being like, well, wait, they're attacking who I am in air
Mm,
quotes, or like who I want to present as, um, and again, like you said, it's that invitation to look within and maybe
yeah,
have that curiosity instead of letting the ego run amok
yeah,
and be in charge,
definitely,
Yeah. Well, I think one of the we talked a lot about the ice baths, and one of, I think you would agree with this, tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the most important things in terms of being able to settle in and get past that ego and get past that first no is breath work and the breath. Um, so we had talked about maybe you offering a short, maybe 5 minute practice.
for
And
sure.
I'm really excited about what you're going to offer,
Mm.
because this is something that I've been practicing for the last year as well. And so when it came up, I was like, oh, great. I'm really excited about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, yeah, nice to sort of follow this thread of where we've come to on cold water immersion. Um, my personal approach to breath in relation to cold is, I would say, probably on the more yin side of breath and ice. I believe that if we're confronted by something that is quite yang, which is the cold, that is stimulating and upregulating, then our best friend is going to be the counter to that, the antithesis to that, the softness. How do we find that calm within the chaos? And so if we're approaching, ice, I usually work with the breath in a few different ways. So I will typically approach and initially be soothing apprehension, be working with the ego, be working with those nerves and that voice that's telling me that it's a bad idea, by even just preparing myself by just starting to check in with the breath, starting to slow the breath, perhaps just gently slowing it down in and out of the nose or in through the nose, blowing the exhale, extending the exhale out of the mouth. So this could be 10 minutes prior, this could be 5 minutes prior, just starting to really get a hold of the breath, um, and teaming up with it from quite an early stage. Now, let's say we're approaching time to enter. I would typically work through something like five, three, five, let's say five, um, cyclical sighs, physiological sighs, quite big, relatively full breaths. A double inhale through the nose and a sigh out of the mouth. So kind of a I do five of those. And that again is just about grounding, about sort of steadying myself. They've been, to come back to what we were discussing earlier, kind of been scientifically proven to be a very effective way to down regulate the nervous system quite quickly. I would then come to 10 breaths with an extended exhale. So in through the nose, blowing the exhale out of the mouth, really just again, calming, settling body, settling mind. I would then probably close that with a couple more sighs, physiological sighs. And then I would set myself kind of a protocol. So that could be right at the end of these three sighs, I am getting in. There's not really a negotiation here. I am getting in. I would then get into the tub, and in those first moments, obviously, anyone who's worked with the cold before will know that one of the main things the cold will do is to try and take your breath. It will try and take you into that kind of that panicked panting in and out of the mouth. You'll struggle to catch your breath potentially. And so the job in those first few moments is to come back to that in through the nose, out of the mouth, extended exhale breath. So I'd aim for 10 breaths like that. So really slowing the breath down, allowing my body to adjust, finding a bit of stillness in the body and the mind as I slow the breath down. And then once I feel I've kind of settled through those first 10 breaths, I'd then be bringing myself back to a gentle, slow, steady nasal breath. So kind of almost working down through the gears to go, okay, it's the cold's trying to jack me way up to 10 in terms of my breathing rate and my kind of depth of breath, size of breath. So I'm going to not try and skip straight back to nasal breathing. I'm going to bring myself down through a nice, slow, steady, extended exhale for 10 breaths, then come back to a nasal breath. And once you've done maybe 10 extended exhale breaths, 10 slow, steady nasal breaths, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 minutes in the ice anyway. And depending on the temperature, I would then, by that point, once you're into those nasal breaths, that's where I find my most deep state of calm. It's like my mind is resting on the breath. I'm now acclimatized as you can be to the cold. I'm adapted, I'm adjusted, and I'll stay with that. And I will typically stay with that until, again, this is all temperature dependent, but if it's particularly cold, I'll be working in a range of sort of 2 to 4 minutes. If it's slightly warmer, say 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, I'd probably work at around 5 minutes. But again, I don't particularly like time as a marker. I'm much more about feeling and breath as the indicators, going, okay, am I shivering? I'm happy if I shiver once, but if I shiver continuously while I'm in there, then I would get myself out. Can I control my shiver response? Can I choose whether I'm shivering or not? That's usually a good marker as to how in control of the experience you are, along with the breath. And yeah, I typically just work with feeling. And I'd cap myself at, say, an absolute maximum of sort of 7 or 8 minutes, depending on the temperature. But usually I err on the side of less is more for me quite often. So yeah, that's sort of the practice for me personally. And that's when I do, this work with friends. And I don't do a huge amount of cold water work professionally, but starting to sort of dip my toe in that realm as well. But that's typically the approach that I bring, is much more about softness. It's about listening to the body as kind of the first and foremost kind of part. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. The softness is really the key to me as well, and not turning it into some sort of machismo, egoic event. So I appreciate that approach as well. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you,
protocol.
Man.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great chat, man. I think especially from where we came from, where I think our first chat was maybe like 10 minutes or so, so I appreciate all your time and sharing your wisdom and experience. And like I said at the beginning, I'm just so pleased with your progress, and to see the things that you're doing, see the ways that you're growing. Selfishly, it gives me a lot of inspiration and hope, and just to see what's possible.
Absolutely, man. No, I really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, it's such a genuine pleasure to chat and catch up. And like, I feel like, we get drawn to these people. We've never met, right? But we've kind of been connected from pretty early on in both our journeys with this work. And you just seem to, you get those people that sort of get you and you get them. And like Connie, I'd put into that camp as well. Johnny Miller is another person like that who I actually know through Connie. And it seems to be just, we might do things differently, but we share kind of that approach, I think. And maybe it's the curiosity element. I don't know what the kind of running theme is, but there seems to be like an openness and a curiosity to not just take something as a kind of at face value. There's sort of a deeper sort of analysis there, or a desire to understand from quite an impartial place is maybe what it feels like, is we're all going, hey, like, I love this practice, but here's someone who's saying that this practice is a load of crap. I wonder why they think that. And maybe I should
Yeah.
listen to some of what they're saying, and maybe I shouldn't. And it's sort of just the openness and the lack of dogma, I think, that I find, appealing about our conversations and the other people that we know and that we respect in this space as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. And yeah, both Connie and Johnny, very influential to me as well. I mean, I've worked with Connie and had her on the podcast a couple of times. It's actually, when you said that, I was like, God, I need to reach out to Johnny, because he and I he and I and Connie all went through the same facilitator training program for breathwork. And Johnny was actually like, I was partnered up with him for half of the program. And really, in a lot of ways, he completely shifted the way that I thought about breath work and was practicing myself.
Mm.
And that has rippled out into the ways that I continue to facilitate and teach today. Like even when I'm, doing neurodynamic breath work and the, more connected, more transformational breath, where I'm like, hey, this is less about speed and more about deep connected, and you don't have to go like so fast to the
Yeah.
point where you're like giving yourself tetany and like, just getting into like this weird space.
Yeah.
You can get there just the same way, just a little bit slower and a little bit more gently to the body. And I really have him to thank for that, because I remember facilitating for him and I was like, are you breathing fast enough? And he was like, yeah, I've just learned that, I'm going to get there maybe a couple minutes slower, but I'm going to get to the same place.
Absolutely.
I don't have to go like 10 for 10,
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I really appreciate being in this space where I can have these chats and, have access to the experience and knowledge and allow myself to be curious, and yeah, I'd love to visit London someday and work with you, and
For sure, man.
be awesome.
Yeah, I love that.
So speaking of London, is that the main place where you're working these days?
It is, yeah. I'm using this year, I think, as a bit of a testing ground to figure out where I'm going to be based slightly longer term. I've got plans to go and spend quite a bit of time this year in Portugal, and I'd like to have a base here still, because I do love it here, but I also know that there are other elements of my life that I'm not able to tap into here. So London is the main place where I work currently. I've got UK retreats elsewhere in the UK. I've got a retreat in the summer in Portugal as well.
Nice.
So yeah, there's a few, I'd say like 80%, 90% of my work is London though.
Awesome. And if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think the primary way is Instagram. So the breath space with an underscore between the words. So the underscore breath underscore space. And my website, which is the breath space, all one word, .co.uk. Events, everything goes out through both of those channels, retreats, one-to-ones. Yeah, everything like that is through those.
Yeah, and even for people that maybe can't get to London in the immediate future, you have a course, right? That you have a breathwork course.
Yeah, so that I think I'm really, yeah, I'll say that I'm really proud of that course. It's the first one I created. It's self-service online course, 21 days of breathwork. And the reason I'm proud of it is because I think it is a very accurate representation of full spectrum breathwork. It covers every realm that I teach from, in terms of functional, in terms of nervous system regulation, in terms of the deeper end of the spectrum as well. And so I think if people are curious and maybe not based in the UK, then that is probably the place to start, without falling into like sales mode. I think that's probably like the best and most accurate representation of what I do, if you're not able to be there in person.
Awesome. It's okay to be in sales mode a little bit. Sorry to toot your own horn, man.
We'll learn. Yeah, I'm learning that gradually.
Well, awesome. Yeah. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're not following Jamie on Instagram, definitely go follow him. The breath space with underscores underneath. Yeah, he's been somebody that I've been following in this space for pretty much most of the time that I've been interested in breathwork, and huge inspiration to me, and so grateful for him sharing his time and experience, and allowing me to reflect off of him and be inspired by him. So definitely appreciate that. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening to it, definitely give us a follow, leave a review. It would definitely help as we continue to grow. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this podcast, and be on the lookout for new episodes next week. And until next time, my friends, don't forget that the vital point is to practice. So keep doing that. We'll see you next time on The Vital Point.